Continuation of discussion of rights, I would like to introduce today the latest concept of rights, that is human rights. Now, human rights means those rights which humans must have in order to be human. Because of the fact that a man is human, on that basis there are certain rights. For example, right not to be tortured is a human right. Now, this is the basic concept. Human rights are international moral and legal norms that aspire to protect all people everywhere from severe political, legal and social abuses. Child labor is now being condemned throughout the world because argument is the child being a child, human child, will have some fundamental right. So these are called human rights. So men, women, children, communities, everywhere, argument now, the latest phase is this, that their human quality, human aspirations, human requirements must all be respected. And that must be done only when it is established as a right. That means state and the government is duty bound to protect these rights. Now this is a unique concept which first emerged in a vague way in course of French Revolution, when the French women demanded, and some philosophers, Tom Paine and others, that men and women must be enjoying equal rights, which was unthinkable in those days, even in Europe. So that is the starting point. But then subsequently we find the history exposed that the course of events didn't allow sufficient development of this concept, etc. But again in the 20th century, first because of the Nazis in Germany and the activities of the communists in the Soviet Union, we had the whole world conscience was shocked, and there was found that certain basic universal conditions of civilized life must be protected because they are human rights. That is, anybody, irrespective of sex, religion, culture, etc., anybody being a human being must have certain rights. Those are called human rights. And therefore, the first thing, immediately after the Second World War, the first thing that the United Nations did was to make a declaration, capital D, the technical legal term, Declaration of the United Nations on Human Rights. That is called Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 10th December 1948. And since then, the whole world is observing 10th December as the Human Rights Day. So, what was there? The United Nations General Assembly make a declaration which had a legal basis, almost some sort of a legal direction to all the member states' governments, that these are the ideals we champion as basic necessity of humans. I have just said no discrimination on grounds of sex, no torture on grounds of ethnicity, no discrimination on grounds of religion, basic right of the education for all human beings. The moment a child is born, is entitled to education. So it is the duty of the parents, it is the duty of the state, it is the duty of the society to protect this. So this is the concept of human rights. But then naturally you can understand that this is after all a lofty ideal. And we have discussed in the other class that unless law has a certain legal basis, it cannot be enforced. It is a declaration is an appeal maximum. To some extent, in the world context of 1950s or 60s, there was some sort of an expectation, but not more than an expectation, that each member state will honor this unanimous Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But unfortunately, the reality is the member state did not. Some of the member states did not. So it was found necessary in the, I say it in one word, one sentence, but so many events took place, so many movements was there, so many debates were there, so many struggle was there to establish that no, specifically certain social and economic rights must be mentioned. And now no declaration, but another term in international law, they call it convention. So convention has got more legal compulsion. So now it is open to the member states because they are all sovereign states in the United Nations. So they have to sign and ratify that yes, I accept it. But though once you accept, that member state will have the obligation to protect it. So in 1966, there were two such conventions were adopted. One is one on civil and political rights. Another was on social and economic rights. So this concept you must appreciate in the context of a discussion on rights. That's a complete novel thing in human history. And the most important thing is what may be called the World Conference on Human Rights 1993, which was held in Vienna. It's a world conference of NGOs, of state governments, of individuals, of voluntary societies, everybody large. For the first time, an international conference made a declaration again that is known as the Vienna Declaration on Human Rights, or Vienna Declaration and Program or Action. Now they add that not only declaration, there must be certain program of action to be taken by the states for promotion and protection of all human rights. That is, a degree of compulsion now gradually imposed on the sovereign states. And UN General Assembly also reaffirmed that decision of the Vienna Conference, and therefore on 20th December 1993, the very concept of human rights got a little more teeth for being enforced. And especially the domestic jurisdiction clause of the UN Charter, Article 2/7. Now that naturally had to be not formally amended, because Charter cannot be amended unless the veto powers they agree in the Security Council. But the total pressure of world public opinion, a moral public opinion of the entire world, they made it a more compulsive now. And there was other international instruments also which developed since this development takes place. That is Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. That was 1975, 1980, 1985, 1995, one after another. 1995, the Beijing Conference of Women's Conference. They built sorts of things, positive recommendation meant for compulsive enforcement. So this way it was going on, that the rights of the women must be protected as part of human rights. Then Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, in sequence of which Government of India has enacted this law very recently. It was the international pressure that domestic violence, violence on women, no sexual harassment at the workplace, so everything brought in. Because they are women, they are humans in that way. Similarly, elimination of child labor. Everybody knows, at least in developing countries, underdeveloped world, that child labor is merrily going on. But after all, the moral pressure is there. This pressure was not there before. Then secondly, because of so many things since the Second World War has taken place in many places, many states, one major glaring example is Sri Lanka, how the ethnic minority has been tortured and their rights had been robbed. They have been robbed of their rights. But unfortunately, because of international politics, full remedy could not be achieved. But still, the pressure is there that you must do that, you must stop it, etc., etc. Depends. Of course, success of human rights will depend on political situation after all. Then religious and linguistic minorities. Again, no violence against this community. Then convention against discrimination in education. For example, in India, again because of politics, we are dragging our feet. Madrasa education, very one type of education which the community is insisting, right or wrong. But now gradually the pressure is coming. No, madrasa education must be modernized. That is some amount of technology, some amount of language teaching, other language teaching, so everything. Even if you maintain your community right, you must modernize your attitude. So that is also a pressure. Then ILO Convention on indigenous and tribal people. So again, and a very vital sector. Not only in India, in all major countries of the world, there is tribal people. Even in Canada, United States, there are tribes. So the whole world as a whole, they are concerned with the rights of the tribal people. So these are all various new developments of the human rights, and that is quite hopeful.
Sir, then can we say that human rights has evolved?
Of course it is, of course. Then the pressure for protecting the group rights also, not only on the individual, but also the status of the individual in the eye of international law. That is, previously, till the other day, so to say, international law could take up cases only between state and state. But now, the International Court of Justice and International Court of Criminal Justice, very recently set up, they are now legally entitled, and it is enforceable to specify which individual is wrong, doing criminal work against the individual or against the group, genocide crime in different countries, Serbia, Bosnia, So the president has been deposed, now he is trying, punishment is given. These are wonderful developments in international law, all promoting human rights. So this is good sign. But I must also point out the recent challenges to human rights movement. For example, armed conflict, Syria. Now what Syrian government now, does it listen to the appeal of human rights? No. Because they are now protected within the Security Council for international political reasons by Russia and China. They are protected. Nothing but pure, simple politics, nothing else. So they are preventing human rights application. Similarly, it used to happen in South Africa before Mandela came and it became independent.
So human rights are continuously falling prey to politics.
So this is one thing. Second challenge is in the form of international terrorism. The international terrorists, whatever their demand, they are coming and killing people merrily. So where is human rights? It cannot be tackled by anybody. But efforts are going on anyway. That third is development without human concern. That is, what I mean is forced development. And that means basically international capitalist regime. They are now forcing various development schemes in different parts of the developing world, and the victim is unprotected Aam common people. That we must have the multi-stories, we must have FDR, we must have this and that. Pressure of the world capitalist system as a matter of globalization. But who will protect the displaced person? Communities after community, they are displaced, the land is cleared, so that there can be new development projects. So that is a challenge, the experts point out, that is also a challenge to human rights. And rule of law, which is the very basis of civilized life, they are also merrily flouted in many countries. So unless rule of law is ensured, there cannot be any right at all, let alone human rights. So this neglect of rule of law, arbitrary governance, subdued judiciary, in many countries judiciary is subdued, so it cannot do anything. And then international human rights court and international criminal courts, they are just established, but there should be more powers. So this is one thing. And rights and duties, next another aspects, that is, we are so long discussing rights, but it has a corollary concept, it has a correlative concept of duties, because rights of X depends on the duties of the Y to respect the rights of X. John Stuart Mill once put it in a very simple way, that the right to swing your hands while doing the morning work depends on the length of the nose of the other man. In swinging your hands while walking, you cannot serve a blow on the nose of the other person. So that is a, they must have the duty to see that it doesn't take place. So rights and duties are complementary to one another. One enjoys rights without others in the community performing their corresponding duties is not possible. So citizens have their rights as demands upon the state or sovereign power, and correspondingly citizens have the duty to pay habitual and moral obedience to the sovereign power. Otherwise, no amount of legislation can help enjoyment of rights. G.D.H. Cole, a very important socialist, guild socialist, he thinks that the functional representation is the real safeguard of maintenance of rights. That function-wise let the people be organized. So one function is dependent on another function, functional group, and in that way power and duties will be correlated. It is from his philosophy of guild socialism. It is. Now Gandhiji had something to very clear to say about this. That is, he said it in 1925 that true source of rights is duty. Plain and simple. First he starts with this. True source of rights is duty. If we all discharge our duties, rights will not be far to seek. But if we leave duties unperformed, rights escape us like the will o' the wisps. The more we pursue the rights, the farther they will flee. That is duties. So, action is duty. Gandhi's statement is action is duty, fruit is the right. So, in this way, various philosophers, they have always correlated these two things, and really we can understand by this time from our discussion that despite all the discourses on rights, rights will have no existence unless the corresponding duties are performed by the citizens and by the state and by the society. And I will conclude our discussion by referring to the recent debates on rights. And here I will just briefly refer, so far as rights discourse is concerned, what may be called the communitarian critique of bourgeois liberal rights. The communitarian argue that traditional liberalism, they have not treated the individual in a real context. They have always talked about the individual as an abstract. Communitarian insists individual is not an abstract category, but individual is deeply embedded in culture of the community. So the community or group identity of an individual must be taken into account while talking of rights of the people. So this is one criticism of the traditional bourgeois or traditional liberal concept of rights. Another very important communitarian, Michael Sandel, in his Liberalism and Limits of Justice in 1982, he was arguing that liberalism rests on a series of mistaken metaphysical and meta-ethical views, and therefore liberal politics of rights should be abandoned, and it should be abandoned in favor of what he says, quote and unquote, politics of common good. Okay, you do the politics, but your target be common good of the society. This is one communitarian. And there are other communitarians like Michael Walzer, who says, no, there are justice, or there are different layers or spheres. So that must be taken recognition of. And he says that equality itself is a complex concept. So we cannot have a decent social life on the basis of rights unless we have a shared experience of living. And therefore, justice in one sphere must be in consonance with justice in another sphere of the society.
So it tries to be all inclusive. This
Uh,
communitarian concept of right, like, because
All inclusive means?
there are communities within the communities, like the sub communities. So what about
That
them?
means, do you mean minorities?
Minorities.
Yes. And that is exactly what has been pointed out by Bhikhu Parekh and what has been emphasized by Salman Rushdie, isn't it?
Yes.
That community within the community, then who will protect their rights? So this is an important dimension which had to be added to the ongoing discourse on rights. And in fact, the third and the last item is feminism, which has something to contribute on this discussion on rights. Their argument is, especially Irish Marian Young, in Justice and the Politics of Difference, she has argued that the ideal of universal citizenship, it doesn't mean anything. He argued that women constitute a distinct social group, and therefore, if the rights are to be maintained in a proper way, then that distinct social group called women, it must be seen as such. The distinct group having a distinct needs, having a distinct perspective. Without this, the discourse of rights will be empty. So these are latest contribution, not a rejection, but they're a contribution to the ongoing developing discussion on rights.